All right, so let's talk about how we set it up. Step one, you got to identify what applications you care about. And to do that, you go into the application definitions page, and you'll notice there's a new button here at the top. It says all, and there's a monitored button. This is the AppExpress. You see you have 33 of 50. You get 50 apps that you can AppExpressify, and we have currently used up 33 of the 50 slots. So when you click the monitored button, it will show you all of the applications that are configured with monitor and steer. So come into the application definitions. You can click any one of, so see how there's like a bunch of Office 365 commons here, multiple rows. Each row has a different domain. So these are the domain pipelines. You can have many different rows associated with a single application name. You can click any one of the edit buttons. If you edit any one of these Office 365 commons, the AppExpress area is shared across all of these, each row. There are 4 ping types that you can select. So this ping type down here, this is the section. This is when we synthetically poll to figure out across each path which one's best. What do we poll and how do we do it? Well, you can select TCP, which is the recommended type because it's very fast and light. It just does a simple TCP connect. It's the default ping type, by the way. You can specify the port number that we're going to ping across, and then you give the ping host name. You want the ping host name to represent as closely as possible what the users will connect to. And this part's a little tricky because if you go to zoom.com, zoom.com is not the destination to which you're going to connect when you make a Zoom call. So the pings are useful for some applications, other applications not as much. That's why we have to combine both ping measurements and actual user observations to get the right quality of experience. You can't just ping something and assume that path is the right path, because that's not always the application or the IP address that the user will connect to. So you can do TCP, HTTP, HTTPS, and ICMP. And again, the default values for all apps, if you don't otherwise configure them, is 100 and 300. All right, so this is probably the most important page. Once you define the applications, you go into the AppExpress group configuration. On the right side over here, you'll see all the AppExpress applications that you've defined. So for it to appear in this list, it must be set to monitor and steer. So once you set it to monitor and steer, it'll show up in this list and you can drag the application over into the group. So first you give the group a name. You can name the groups anything you want. You can't have spaces. You select what overlay you want the traffic to go into. This is a subtle but important point. AppExpress flatly overrides overlay ACLs. It comes before the overlay ACLs start. So anything that you configure in AppExpress, if you say, I want Workday, Apple, Atlassian, Box, if I want these apps to be in this group, and I select the SSE overlay for these apps, those apps are now in the SSE overlay. It's as if they were matched in the SSE overlay ACL. Now, the next step is you need to pick the eligible transport paths. There's no sort order here. Whichever ones you check, it's going to search across all of these, and whichever path from these transport types is the best one is the one it's going to pick. That means you wouldn't want to click Zscaler and click local breakout at the same time. That would be kind of silly because some of your traffic, depending on the application, might go to local breakout and skip Zscaler, and other traffic would go through Zscaler or Axis or whatever SSE you have. So you got to think a little bit about what transport paths you include in the group configuration. We currently do not support pass-through transport types. So that means like AWS Transit Gateway, Network Manager, situations where we're just flatly routing. We do not support those. It's local breakout, backhaul, and all of the third-party services such as Axis, Zscaler, Netscope, and so on. Those are the ones that are supported by AppExpress. And then finally, you pick a target QoE for the group. Now, next part, there's this whole section at the bottom. This is collapsed by default. You don't normally need to configure this. These are designed to kind of auto-configure themselves. For instance, the first number here, this is the ping interval. The lowest you can set is 10. The second thing here is the source loopback. it's imperative, you absolutely must have loopbacks configured to use AppExpress. It will not work without them. You can also give it what IP range, what DNS ping and user destinations you want, what name servers to use for this group. This will be used for DNS proxy as well as resolving the host names that it finds in the ping hostname target. Now, the last part are these two measurements here, these two settings. There's a user QoE update interval and a ping QoE update interval. The way these work is the user QoE update interval. This is how often we take all the user measurements and calculate the user QoE AppDeck score. It's the frequency with which we stop and say, what are the users experiencing on this particular path? And then there's a second value thing here called the ping QoE update interval. This is how often we calculate the pings that we're creating. Every 10 seconds, we're pinging across each path. This is by default set to 5 minutes. Now, at the end of each ping QoE interval, we reset the state table. So, or we reshuffle the order of the ping targets. What that means is that if your user QoE interval is set to 1 and your ping QoE interval is set to 5, that means that if I change every minute, I can search up to 5 paths before the system resets. So you would be able to check up to 5 different paths before it gives up and starts over again. Whereas let's say that I set the user QoE interval to 5 and I set the ping QoE interval to 30, then I would be able to pick up to 6 paths because 30 divided by 5 equals 6. In other words, the ping QoE must be divisible by the user QoE score. You don't necessarily need to know this. Like I said, this is collapsed by default for creating a new group, and it will automatically, the numbers that are configured here by default work for most situations. All right, last step is to apply the AppExpress groups that you just created to the appliances that you want to optimize.